Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon as per your respective time zone. On behalf of entire Evosys Managed Services team, we'd like to welcome you all to 22B Supply Chain Management Procurement and Advanced Procurement Advisory webinar session. This important session is to keep you fully synchronized with the new features and functionalities as a part of this crucial release which Oracle provides. My name is Hardik Patel and I'm an operations manager here at Evosys Managed Services Department. Today, I'm your host for this session, and I'm glad to introduce my colleague, Sumit Mehta, who's part of our vast supply chain team at Evosys Mastec. Today, he'll take us through all the procurement and advanced procurement updates for 22B quarter release. Today's session is planned for around 45 minutes, and we'll make sure that we also leave some time to answer all your questions you may have. Before we move to today's agenda, let's have a quick look at the important disclaimer. We would like to convey you our approach towards Oracle updates in a very simpler method. We'll be taking you through vital analysis for the 22B updates done by our experts, which will help you incorporating new features and updates easily into your system. We will also sync you on any bugs or known issues if there are any. It's good to have an interactive session, so please do ask questions through chat or question panel, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. In case if we run out of time, we'll make sure to respond to you even at a later stage. This is to give you a glimpse on how we have crafted the structure of this session. So first thing, what you see here is a list of new features coming into 22B, and then detailing on features so you get brief understanding on what new features are all about. The next one is what are the business benefits and important takeaway for you as a decision maker. There are four important components wherein we have done in-depth analysis of the features which we're going to present to you today. The first one is impact level analysis, which demonstrates the impact on the end user. If it's a low impact, then regression testing can be avoided. If it's a high impact, then we need to opt for regression testing. Second one, which is we all are aware that there are some features which are by default auto-enabled by Oracle, and there are some which you need to opt for. And the third one highlights the nature of the feature. There will be certain configuration which may be required, and some can be used without any changes. And the last one, which is a quick win, this term which we use to simply convey that what is ready to use by investing minimum amount of time and what requires significant amount of time and effort to make use of this feature. Before I hand it over to my colleague to begin today's session, with a quick poll, we'd like to know which industry does your organization belongs to. This will help us creating more fruitful webinar moving forward. Thank you so much. We'll be closing the poll, and now immediately I'll be handing over to my colleague, Sumit. Over to you now. Unmute yourself and the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Hardik. Am I audible?
Yes, you are very much. Please proceed. Thank you.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sumit Mehta. I'm currently working as a solution architect in the North America region for Evosys Mastec. I'm giving this session out of Toronto, a lovely 14 degrees Celsius weather here. I look forward to having this discussion with the team, and again, welcome everyone who has joined. So let's begin. Do you still have control of the mouse? Oh, no, I do. Okay. So since we are short on time, I'll quickly begin. The way Hardik described, we have divided this upgrade basically into 4 different buckets. Now, half of them are quick wins and the others are not quick wins. So when we say quick wins, what essentially it means is that it doesn't take a lot of time for you or anyone who is configuring the system to apply that feature and have it ready for use. and the ones that are not quick wins are the ones that are going to take some time, some effort on your part to configure them and then start using them. And again, quick wins, we have divided into 3 portions. So we have quick wins that do not require any configurations. We have quick wins that do require some configurations. And then we have quick wins that are actually features that have to be opted into. So I'll start with the first one, and then we'll see what exactly that means. Now, this is an analysis of the overall 43 features that we have this time in the 22B update. And you can see that we have quick wins with configuration, without configurations. We don't have any quick wins that are opt-in yet in this feature. And so this is a quick analysis. Now with that, let's jump into the bigger bucket here, which is the quick wins default with no configuration. So now before I get into this first slide, again, the impact analysis will shed more light on what I was speaking earlier. So if you see at need to enable, this says that we do not need to enable. So that's what it means when we say quick win and a default. So this is by default a feature in 22B, so you don't need to do anything. Now for this particular section, we are saying these are quick wins without any configuration required. So that is what this slide says. On the right, if you see configuration, it says no. That means that there is no configuration required to do it. And again, we are saying these are all quick wins. So this, of course, says that this is quick win. This will not take a lot of time or effort from on your part to enable it or start using it. And this impact analysis will keep on changing when we move to the other buckets, which are the quick win with configurations and the others that are not quick win. So with that out of the way, let's look at the first feature. And as we can see, the feature says that employee vacation and delegation rules report. Now, I believe most of the team members here, they would be aware that Oracle gives you a functionality. Oracle gives users the functionality of creating vacation rules and delegation rules. Now, so far, there was no proper way of seeing at a mass level. So for example, if you have 5,000 users, you wouldn't really have a simple tool to see how many of those users have created a vacation rule or excuse me, delegation rules. Then we'd have to create a custom report. With this upgrade, there is a new report, which is, as the name here says, Employee Vacation and Delegation Rules Report. Now, this report can be run. This is available as a seeded report to any user right now. And then you have options of running it on different parameters. So we have business unit, legal entity, employee name, and with a from and to date. Excuse me. So with this option, you can see at any given point of time how many users have created that vacation rules. And this can be done at a frequent basis. This can, like any other report, it can be run with a specific schedule. And then if we have an admin department in the business who is going to be overseeing, an HR department that is going to be overseeing these things, then the report can be passed on to the user, and then they can take the next step or do any analysis required on that. So this is the first feature. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of these because there's about 50 slides to cover. But if we do have any questions, please note them down and we'll try to answer them at the end of the session. And before, again, I start on this slide, if you see the heading, these features are divided into subheadings. So for example, this employee vacation and delegation rules, it's a generic feature. It doesn't just apply to purchasing. Then there would be features that are applicable only to purchasing, and so on and so forth. So the heading is going to give you an idea of what work area this feature belongs to. And then we have the details, which is a quick one-liner, which is going to tell you what exactly it does. And then we have the details and screenshot on the slide as well. So now this feature is specific to purchasing. And what it allows us to do is route purchase orders for approval using the accrue at receipt attribute. Now, purchase orders, when we are creating approval rules for purchase orders, there are several options we have. Mind you, some of these screens are screens that are a part of setup. They may not be available, or a front-end user may have never seen this. And so I'll try to bring in some context here for this one particularly. So this is an approval rule and which is configured, and it gives an option for the configurator to decide how the specific transaction is going to get routed to. For example, we might have purchase order rules which say that any amount more than 10,000 is going to go to X, Y, and Z, and any amount that is less than 10,000, it only goes to X. So that is a kind of rule that we create in purchasing. So far, we did not have an option where we could create a rule based on whether the transaction or whether the purchase order is set to accrue at receipt or not. Now, accrue at receipt is an option that is generally relevant when we talk about purchase orders that are of inventory nature. So these would be goods that would be received and stored in an inventory. Compared to this, we have purchase orders that are of an expense nature, which most likely would be accrue at period end. So this is it's a feature that allows us to accrue that particular purchase order. And so far, we did not have the option of routing purchase order based on the accrual options that are available. Now we do. So if the business has a requirement and we want to choose a purchase order routing based on what the accrue at receipt attribute is, then we can start using this feature now and take advantage of it. So this is just the condition. As you can see here, we have a condition here, and then the action still remains the same. So we can approve it using a single worker or a cost center manager or different options. Again, that gets a little too technical, but this is, if I were to speak in simple terms, you can now route a purchase order based on whether it is an expense or inventory natured purchase order. Moving on. Again, another one in purchasing, release recommendations for purchase orders that don't originate from Oracle supply planning. Now, this feature, it not only applies to purchasing, but it speaks slightly about the area where purchasing and Oracle supply chain planning come together. So now if I bring your attention, and we'll go to the screenshot, if I bring your attention to the statement, what it's trying to say is that with this update, if you are Oracle supply chain planning, determine that a purchase order needs to be rescheduled or canceled, including the purchase order generated outside the regular planning process, then your Oracle planning can do so. So let's say we have, again, I'm going to talk about it in two different sense. So we have Oracle purchasing, which is where the purchasing orders, the purchasing transactions will be generated. And then we have the Oracle supply planning, which is where we do the planning. Now, up till this point, so before this upgrade, they would not be in sync in the sense that if I were to cancel or reschedule a purchase order in Oracle planning, it will not cancel itself or get rescheduled in the purchasing area. So what that might mean is that from a planning standpoint, I have a demand which is rescheduled, and now I want to reschedule the purchase order that was going to fulfill that demand. So that is something that I'd have to do manually up till this point. But now with this upgrade, if I were to change anything in supply chain planning, then that would also change the specific attribute on the purchase order. So if we look at the screenshot here, the first screenshot is from supply chain planning, right? And the last screenshot is from procurement purchase orders. So what the screenshot is trying to point you to is that if this was done the right way based on the instructions that are given here, and then there are more that the detailed Oracle document is going to give you, we can reschedule the specific purchase order which was meant to fulfill a demand that was generated in planning. And we can see that the requested delivery date here, though we do not have the before and after picture, but this is the attribute that will automatically get changed based on the changes that we made in supply chain planning. Okay. Next feature, keep the dates for your sales order and purchase orders synchronized. Again, this is a feature that impacts both purchasing and order management. So up till this point, the order management part, which is where we have the sales order created for the businesses, they were not in sync for this specific functionality. So they were not, the order management part and the purchasing part are not in sync. And what that means is that if I were to change dates on a sales order, it wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't be able to see the impact of that in purchasing. So now if you update the shipment date, delivery date, or shipment method on a purchase order that you manually create, or an open purchase order that you revise, then this feature automatically updates these values on the sales order lines and adds the reason for the change on the sales order line. So this is what is now available to you. Without this feature, what it would mean is that anytime you make a change on a purchase order transaction, someone would have to manually change those values on the sales order line. Now, what this feature allows us to do is not only changes the relevant attributes on the sales order line, but it also provides a reason for why that change has been done. This applies to specific kinds of sales orders. So we have standard pick to order, assemble to order, and items that are part of a shipment set or kit. But this basically covers, I would say, 80% of the kind of transactions that the sales order transactions we have in order management. This is an additional section. Now this is the business benefit is I've kept this section only for specific slides where the business benefits were evident, and then they do point out to specific issues that the businesses face. So for this particular one, we can see that this will simplify and make fulfillment more efficient for the drop shipment orders. This is going to remove manual work for whenever we have a dynamic situation and the purchase orders are getting changed a lot. So this is what this feature helps us to do. Again, these are still part of the same bucket that we discussed before. So these are quick wins. They do not have to be enabled. So these are default features and they do not need any configuration either. So likely when you, after the upgrade, when you see your sales order, and if you are to try out a transaction by changing the purchase order, you immediately see the impact of that on your sales order line. Okay, moving on, we have a few bug fixes in this update, and there's about 4 or 5 of these. So the first one is that default tax attributes when submitting purchase order using the draft purchase orders REST API. So for anyone who is not aware, REST API is another means or a tool which allows the technical team to directly update the middleware. So it allows us to make changes on the transactions without having to use the front end screen. And so for this particular transaction, we are talking about draft purchase orders, and by draft purchase order, this would mean an incomplete purchase order that, for example, the user had started creating but has not submitted it. So an incomplete status is the same as draft status. So before the 22B update, tax attributes on the purchase order schedules didn't default from tax setup when a purchase order was submitted. So what that would mean is that if I were to create or make any changes to a draft purchase order using the REST API service, the tax determinant, which are meant to be a part of the purchase orders, wouldn't be set up by the REST API because the REST API wouldn't be able to identify it. But now it can. So this just makes the usability of REST API, this increases the usability of REST API for updating draft purchase orders. Moving on, we also have the Oracle reference here. So this Oracle reference, if anyone was interested in the actual details of this bug and the history and what are the business cases, then based on the Oracle reference number, you can delve deeper into what that bug actually was and what is the business case for that, and if there's a use of this feature to you. Moving on, validate purchase basis instead of line type when sourcing purchase orders to blanket agreements. Now, before 22B update, you couldn't create purchase orders from source blanket agreements if the line type of the purchase order did not match the line type of the blanket agreement. So by line type, we are referring to, this is an Oracle terminology, but for a business, what it would mean is that a line type can be goods, or a line type can be services, or it can be a custom line type that you create. Now, whenever we are creating a purchase order, we have to pick the line type as well. And it's the same for blanket purchase agreements. Up till this point, if you had a purchase order that was being created for a goods line type, and if you had a blanket agreement which was created for a service line type, you would not be able to match those, meaning that you would not be able to create a purchase order which would source that specific blanket agreement just because the line types were different. But now there is a workaround which allows you to do that. So that is what this is, validate purchase basis instead of line type when sourcing purchase orders to blanket purchase agreements. So this is again a bug. We have the bug number here. Allow procurement requesters to modify only those change orders that they initiated. So this is exactly what the statement says. Before the update, if a procurement requester had the privilege to view other requesters' requisitions, they could edit change orders even if they did not initiate the change order. So this specific update fixes that bug. Next one is default maximum file size megabytes for email communication to 5 MB. So this is again a part of setup. So this limit was 0 megabytes up till this point. Now this limit has been increased to 5 megabytes. And this again specifically talks about email communication limit. Okay, and again we have the bug reference here. Okay, import purchase prices without an item or a category. So this is not a unique situation. Businesses often have a need where they want to import purchase prices. Now, up till this point, so before this upgrade, if you wanted to import purchase prices, so for example, if you have manufacturers' part numbers, and if you wanted to update the prices of those part numbers in the system, you would not be able to do it unless you have an item defined or a category defined. Now, if we had an item defined, then we'd also have to create a trading partner item relationship. So this is a technical terminology, but what it means is that you need to create a mapping between how you define the item, and it might be in my organization ABC123, versus how the manufacturer defines the item, which might be something which is a 6-digit number. So until we define that relationship, so that is one option, or we created a category. So we have a purchasing category and we assigned this manufacturer's item into that purchasing category. Until and unless we did either of these two actions, we would not have been able to import purchase prices. But now we can. So now you can import external purchase prices without these configurations for the manufacturer parts that are excluded from purchasing. And so this is what might happen in a scenario. You are in the beginning of your purchasing cycle, or there's a new manufacturer that you have decided you're going to transact with, and you do not know how many of these are actually going to get purchased, right? So we are still in the process of having these items included in the main purchasing cycle, but we do want the prices of these items available in the system to be viewed. So now you can do that. If neither a manufacturer part nor a purchasing category mapping exists for the manufacturer part. The external prices are imported as disabled for purchasing, and the lines are not imported into purchase agreements. So again, I won't go into much details. There's more aspects to this, but prima facie, you can now import purchase prices without having any mapping to an item or a category. Import to purchase agreements created from external purchase prices. Now let's spend some time at this screenshot here. So this screenshot, as you can see, this is a blanket purchase agreement, and we are at the line level. So now there are two things that are highlighted here. One is an item. So this would just be a normal item that we define in product management. And then we have item attributes. In the item attributes, we have the manufacturer and the manufacturer part number. So prior to this update, the manufacturer and the manufacturer part numbers were displayed only for agreements without item numbers. So you'd only be able to see this information if the agreement did not have any item number. But now with this release, you can see it in sync. So you can see the item information and the manufacturer part information together for the same part, or something that's relating to the same part. So that's what it says, improvements to purchase agreement created from external purchase prices. And by external purchase prices, like I said in the previous slide, it refers to these manufacturer part numbers. So likely they'd have their own part number and they'd have their own prices. Moving on. Include additional attributes on purchasing, document, approval, notification titles. So these are the additional attributes. So before I go there, let me talk more about what this is. So if you break it into parts, it says purchasing, document, approval, notification titles. So if you are a buyer, if you are in the buying team, you would be receiving approval notifications, and that could be requisitions, purchase orders, agreements, things like that. Those notifications could be coming via email. They could be notifications on your screen as bell icons. Now those notifications they don't have all the information, but they have the most important information regarding that specific purchase transaction that is being routed to you for approval. What this is saying is that you can now add these attributes to this notification title. So for example, if we wanted to add, let's say your current notification title, if I have created a requisition and you're my supervisor, then the notification that comes to you for approval might say requisition from Sumit, and it may not necessarily tell you what the functional currency is, or what the functional currency code is, or functional currency approval total is. So these are the kind of things that were not available up till this point. Now there's an option of having these things included. So for example, PO description, right? So you would not have been able to see this. You would probably see the PO number and then who is it coming from. But with this, you can also see the PO description in the title. So now again, this is something that has to be modified. So you can decide out of these what is the most important attribute to you, and then if you want it to be displayed in your purchase order notification. Okay, so now we are moving on to different work area, which is spend classification. So as the name says, spend classification. So this is a work area which allows the users to classify the spend. And this is often a requirement by business where they want to understand if, for example, I have 5,000 users, and if I have 1,500 POs or requisitions being created on a monthly basis, I need to know what is the highest demand, and then I need to be able to classify that spend. So that is what this work area is. With this 22B update, you can now estimate the size of a sample training set. Now, again, I won't go into much details of this part. We'll try to have a look at the screenshot and understand what it is trying to do. So whenever we are creating a sample training set, up till this point, you wouldn't really have an idea of the number of transactions that the sample training set is going to include. Now you do. So when we are creating a sample training set, based on the sampling volume percentage, we can see what are the number of transactions we are going to see. So this is not directly, this does not directly answer a business need, but it is a means to an end, just like this module is, right? Where we are trying to classify the spend. So this just makes the work of the person who is doing the analysis more easier. That's what it says. Moving on, we have a couple of more for spend classification. We can now also filter the downloaded data set based on business unit and from and to date. So I won't read this, but like the screenshot says, whenever we are creating or downloading a data set, we now have the option of filtering, just like we would have in an Excel, where we can filter based on business unit. So if you have 12 business unit, you'd have to download the data and then do it manually. But now you can, if you wanted data only from a specific business unit, and then it also gives us the option of picking the from and to date. So this makes the information that is available out there easily. It allows the user to easily process and filter the information that is available out there, making the work easier. Lastly, we have use spend classification analysis dashboard to enhance your analytics. So this is again a screenshot of the dashboard that is available for spend classification. Now, what it is trying to say is that this is just a pictorial view of the kind of information that the data is going to give you. So instead of having it in a format where you have to look at the numbers, you can now literally see in the form of a graph the difference that the spend classification has made. So this enhances the insight into your organization's operations with a new dashboard in Oracle Transactional Business Intelligence. So this is the OTBI area. So this helps us get more value from the spend classification analysis. Okay, moving on, procurement contracts. Now this screenshot, so what I'm trying to do is, for many of these slides, there's more information in the screenshot, and I feel that the message can be clearer if you look at the screenshot. So that's what I'm going to do for some of these slides. Now, if you look at this specific screenshot, now this screenshot is a part of a this is from inside of a contract. So this can be an enterprise contract, and we are at the fulfillment level. So we are looking at the fulfillment tab, where we can see how this specific contract will be fulfilled, right? And we are in the purchasing area. Now, up till this point, so before this feature, user would not have an option to pick different sites for a specific supplier. So you also wouldn't be able to see supplier address and supplier site as a different field. So with this upgrade, now the existing supplier fields are renamed accordingly in the contract header lines and fulfillment lines to distinguish between supplier address and the supplier site. So this just helps the user get at a more granular level, because many suppliers might have more than one site, and then we might want to fulfill the contract needs for that specific contract by using a different site. Now that gives us the option. We have the supplier address and supplier site here, and we have it at the header, line, and fulfillment level. So that is going to make the work of the buying team easier. Again, with regards to procurement contracts, we have this feature which allows us to differentiate base contracts created from sourcing negotiations. So sourcing negotiations, this is easy to understand, and what we mean by this is negotiations that are created with the intent of shortlisting suppliers, A, shortlisting suppliers, or B, finding the right supplier for my purchasing needs. And often in these situations, what would happen is that we would have sourcing negotiations, and then the sourcing negotiations would be mapped with procurement contract. But it is possible that while the sourcing the negotiation is live and it has not been concluded, we still have a base contract attached to these sourcing negotiations. So the base contract is going to be a generic contract, which does not have a specific, which is not tied to a specific supplier. And that is what we mean by a base contract. So when the buying team or when the legal team or anyone is looking at the contracts, you can now see not just transactional contracts. So transactional contracts would be contracts that are tied to a specific supplier, that are tied to a specific transaction. So the buying team will not only be able to see those transactional contracts, but they will also be able to see the base contracts. So again, this helps get an overarching view of what is going on in terms of contracts. So up till this feature, user did not have an option of including base contracts. Now they do. So this is, as this is highlighted here, there's just an additional attribute that has been added, and we can now see both kinds of contracts: base contracts that are not tied to anyone, and then transactional contracts that are. Oops. Support additional parameters in contracts, descriptive flex fields for setting context and filtering value set. Now, descriptive flex field, again, I'll slightly speak on what this is. So, descriptive flex field is a way that allows anyone who is configuring the system to have additional attributes added to a transaction. So if, for example, we have a procurement contract, and the procurement contract might have information, for example, supplier, and it might have information about the purchasing area. But then if the business process that our business follows, it has additional attributes based on which the values in the procurement contracts are going to change, these additional attributes can be created as descriptive flex fields. So these are just flex fields. So if we just focus on this words, these are just flexible fields, and it allows us to store and use additional data that might not necessarily be available as a standard or seeded attribute in the procurement contract. So now when we are creating descriptive flex field specifically for contracts, we have more options available. We have additional parameters available. These additional parameters supported for contract header and line let you tailor the descriptive flex field. Like I said, we have an example here. You can now filter and display only the bill to accounts of the contract's customer in a descriptive flex field segment. This is also called the DFF segment. So this, of course, enhances the user experience and allows us to tailor the screen and the form more closely towards the business's needs. Okay, now we move on to sourcing. So sourcing is the again, the business terminology and Oracle terminology is the same, and we are talking about negotiations and RFPs, RFQs, auctions, things like that. Search and add unique suppliers. So if you look at this screen, this one says edit negotiation. So we are inside of a negotiation, RFQ 39Q85. Now, if we, up till this point, what would happen is that if I were to search for suppliers, and let's say I want to add 50 suppliers to this specific negotiation, the system would not be able to identify the suppliers that are already there in the system. Now with this feature, the system will know already that the suppliers that are already there in the selection criteria, they have been selected. We should not be adding them again. So this looks like a pretty basic thing, but it wasn't available up till this point. So now if you look at this area, what this light blue color means is that these two suppliers have been selected. So again, let's assume that there are 49 suppliers here, and then you won't be able to, you can scroll down and see each of the suppliers that there is, but to make this easier, you might just reselect the same suppliers that you have already selected and you have already passed on to the supplier selection. Now with this feature, the system is going to know that, for example, 7 Corporation, this is already there in the selected suppliers list. Now when I try to do it again, system won't pass it on. Without this feature, it would have passed it on. Right, so that is what it is trying to do. It is just making this whole thing a little easier, because there's only a very small screen where you see the selection of the suppliers that you have already added. So this overall makes the supplier addition more easier for the user. Okay, we have selected sourcing bug fixes in this update. Before the right sold to legal entity, LE stands for legal entity, in purchase orders created from award in a supply chain orchestration flow. So before this update, when the supply chain orchestration flow is enabled, the sold to legal entity created from negotiation wasn't derived correctly. So if you had like 5 business unit, and if you were running a negotiation, and if you are creating a purchase order out of that negotiation, there is a chance that the purchase order might have picked the incorrect legal entity, sold to legal entity. So this is a feature that has been now corrected with this upgrade. When creating a BPA from order creation options are defaulted from Procurement BU setup. So once you update to 22B, whenever we create a blanket purchase agreement from a negotiation, the order creation options are now correctly defaulted from the configuration business function setup page. So this is very similar to this. It's just because of the bug, the information wasn't flowing as seamlessly as it should have, but now it does. I'm quickly going to look at Hardik, just want to confirm I'm still audible. And
yes, you are very
okay.
much.
Perfect. Moving on, no changes to award once it is submitted for approval. So with this fix, category managers, and these are the folks from an Oracle terminology who would be owning the negotiations, they will be forced to close scoring before submitting an award for approval. They can no longer modify the award amount or scores while approval is in process. So goes without saying that the negotiation owner would have been able to do that. Now, this specific feature, this upgrade fixes this bug. It actually fixes 2. There is an additional sourcing bug fix here, which is creating surrogate response directly in the commercial stage is not allowed. So a surrogate response is, like the word says, it's created on behalf of a supplier. Let's say we are in a negotiation cycle and there are suppliers who are not able to log on onto the supplier portal and create responses by themselves. So the buying team would create a surrogate response on their behalf. Creating surrogate response directly in the commercial stage is not allowed. So when we say commercial stage, we are talking about 2-stage negotiations. So two-stage negotiation would have a technical stage wherein we discuss, for example, requirements, and we find out if the specific supplier is going to be, if we want to have a relationship with the supplier, things like that. And then there is a commercial part, which is where we look at the numbers, where we look at what is the price that they are giving, right, and things like that. So in a two-stage negotiation, ideally, we do not want decisions to be made based on the price. We would want that the suppliers clear the technical stage, which is the first stage, and if they are cleared, only then we see the prices, right? And that is what this does. As a part of the two-stage process, the technical part of the response must be entered, evaluated, and shortlisted. So the buying team or the scoring team now has to pass through this process before a buyer can enter the commercial portion for the response on behalf of the supplier. So we cannot enter commercial surrogate responses unless we have already shortlisted the suppliers in the technical stage. And this is the error that it is going to give you. Next feature is no auto sourcing of requisitions in award to contract flow. So before the upgrade 22B, if you opted in to create a supplier contract and a negotiation outcome, purchase orders would be automatically created from that specific BPA, and any linked requisitions would be automatically sourced. Now with this upgrade, after you create the supplier contract and complete the award to create the BPA, purchase orders won't be automatically sourced. So there might be, even if you have created a BPA as a end result of a negotiation cycle, there might be, for specific purchases, you do not want to use that BPA. So this now gives discretion to the buying team and to decide whether they want to use this specific BPA or blanket purchase agreement, which has been generated as a result of the negotiation cycle, or if they want to use something else, a different BPA. Okay. So we have the next section now, quick wins default with configuration. And this section actually does not have any slides, so we do not have any quick wins that also require configuration. So now we'll move into quick wins that are opt-ins. And what that means is that these are not default. So until and unless the user decides to opt in for this feature, they won't have access to it. They won't be able to use it. Okay, the first one that we have is disable automatic sourcing of requisition lines. So you can now disable automatic sourcing added using enter requisition lines. So if you can imagine, let's say you are an advanced procurement user and you are going to use the enter requisition line feature, which has advanced capabilities. So it is going to you are going to use that feature to create a requisition, and you have the ability of deciding the line type. Now when we are doing that, up till this point, what would have happened is that the requisition line would have been automatically sourced. So based on the item you have chosen, the line would have been automatically sourced to a blanket purchase agreement or to another kind of agreement. But with this upgrade, the user is now going to have an option. It only applies to requisition line created using the enter requisition line page. So this is an advanced procurement user feature. It does not apply to lines created using smart forms, non-catalog request or REST resources. So for smart forms or non-catalog, it would still source automatically. It only applies to new lines that don't include a document source or existing requisition line. Now, after a requisition line is created with the feature turned on, the behavior of the line will be consistent even after the feature is subsequently turned off. So for example, if we have a requisition line that does not have a valid document source, and it is created using the enter requisition line page. In this case, the requisition line will never be automatically sourced to an agreement, even if the feature is later turned on. So this doesn't happen a lot. So we wouldn't actively be turning on and off this feature. But if you were to, then this is kind of referring to if we had, let's say, 100 requisitions that were using this feature, that were taking advantage of this feature. And now if you decided you don't want to use this feature, those 100 requisition lines or requisitions would still behave as if the feature was turned on. Dual units of measure. Now, if you look at the screenshot, so this screenshot is from inside of a purchase order, and we are looking at the life cycle. So the life cycle is going to give you information like how much quantity has been received, what has been delivered, what has been returned, what has been invoiced, things like that. So before this upgrade, you would not have been able to see this information in the secondary UOM. And there are some industries which rely heavily on the secondary UOM. So there are transactions that there could be purchases made in primary UOM, but then those items will be used or received in the secondary UOM. So this feature now allows us to do that. So if you look at one of these receipts, we are in, like I said, we are looking at the line item, the line level information inside of a purchase order. So if you look at the receipts section, we can see that this specific receipt, let's assume that there is just one item in it. 30 quantities were received in the primary UOM, but 2300 quantities were received in the secondary UOM. So this just gives us more clarity of what is being done. So it kind of makes secondary UOM as good or equally usable as the primary UOM for all means and purposes. Again, a feature with regards to dual unit of measures, allow invoice match to receipt for items priced in their secondary UOM. So if we have items that are priced in the secondary UOM, without this feature, we would not have been able to change the invoice match option to receipt. So now this follows on with the earlier feature that we discussed, because the receipting work area most likely excuse me, would not be able to identify what is being received in the secondary UOM. Now that the receipting work area is able to identify that, so we can now easily use the invoice match option set to receipt, specifically for items that are priced in the secondary quantity. If they are priced in the primary quantity, primary unit of measure, this feature is always available. It wasn't available if they were priced in secondary UOM, but now it is available as well. So that just makes the whole thing more easier for businesses that use secondary UOMs a lot. Okay, excuse me. Release recommendations for transfer of project supplies. So now this is a new-ish area in Oracle supply chain, and like it says, project-driven supply chain. What this allows us to do is it allows us to configure the supply chain specifically for businesses that are heavily based on projects. So if we have, for example, the construction industry, or yeah, I think that's what I can think of. So if I take the example of the construction industry, which is heavily project driven, we want to ensure that the supply chain part works in sync with the requirement of the project. And so this is a newish developing area in Oracle. And for this specific area, we have this new functionality now, and this is a classic case actually. So what this is going to allow the user to do is release recommendations for transfer of project supplies. I won't go into this, but I'll talk about a business case. So let's say we have a project requirement, or let's say a task requirement if we get more granular. And for fulfilling, if we wanted to fulfill the requirements of that project, the only means we would have is use whatever is available on hand or create a purchase order. So there's no other way of fulfilling the demand that has been created by a project. When we do this, what might happen is that if we have multiple projects running at the same time because of different reasons, we might have a lot of material that is now not required for the project which it was procured for. So we have project A and project B, and we procured some material for project A, but now the project A is near completion. We have lots of material that won't be used or won't be required now. Now we also have project B that is going to start soon. To create to fulfill the demands of project B, we would have to look at the on-hand inventory. But then, since material in the project A is not a part of on-hand, it is a part of project A, so we would not have been able to use that, and that is why we would have to use another means of fulfilling the demand. Likely, we would create a purchase order to fulfill the demands of project B. Now with this feature, what we can do is we can move material between project. And so if you look at what this feature says, is that with this update, the result of such a plan will produce a recommendation. So we'll see what actually we won't be able to see what a recommendation looks like. But in principle, what it is going to do is it is going to produce a recommendation to move supplies from one project or task with excess to another with a shortage. And we don't have enough time to go into much details, but we can see the usability of this feature. The planners can choose to reduce access in your project suppliers by releasing recommendations from the plan to change project attribution on the following documents. So we have purchase order schedules, transfer order lines that aren't shipped, work orders, on-hand inventory. So we can reroute these transactions and send them over to fulfill the demands of project B, just like I used in my example. Now, this feature needs to be enabled. Again, we are in this bucket. We are looking at features that have to be enabled. So someone has to push a button to be able to use them. And this is the button. So this specific button, enable movement of supply between project and task. So this is the button that has to be enabled. And once it is enabled, then we can start using these features. Again, like I've said earlier, we are only giving a snapshot or a bird's eye view of what's available in the new upgrade. There's more information, and then there's more resources available through Oracle and through Evosys if you want to explore this feature. But hopefully the slides are doing justice in sharing the information on what is being done in the feature. Moving on, prevent purchase order releases when amounts or quantities exceed the limits on the referenced blanket agreement line. So if you look at this screenshot is from a purchase order. So this is an edit change order. So a change is being created, a purchase order is being modified. Now what would happen is that if we have hundreds of users, they are using the same agreement, and let's say the agreement is very close to being using its full amount. So let's say I have an agreement and the amount on the blanket purchase agreement. So blanket purchase agreement would have a line item in it. Now the blanket purchase agreement has an amount of $1 million. Now there are hundreds of people using the same agreement to create requisitions and whatnot. Now, until that amount has been exceeded or until the requisition has been approved, the system won't really stop the person from creating the purchase order. So it is possible that we only have, let's say, $100 left on that agreement, but then there are 200 people who simultaneously create a purchase order. All of these are referencing the same blanket agreement. Now, if these were approved, and if they ended up in a status that does not let Oracle fulfill the demand, then it will be humongous task to find out which purchase order led to that order going beyond, right? So with this feature, now this is more in sync, right? And what it is going to do is that if we have a specific purchase order based on the amount, the system will identify if it is going to exceed the amount in the blanket purchase agreement. If you look at this comment, your order will cause the total amount released against the agreement ending to it to one line to exceed its amount limit. So this is a warning. Sorry, this is an error. So this is going to stop the buying team from creating that purchase order. If we did not have this feature, then of course we'd have to manually find out which purchase order has led to this agreement being overused and things like that. So with this feature, now the buying team or anyone creating the purchase order will be able to see the warning. Your order will cause the total quantity released against agreement line to exceed its quantity limit. So we don't just have the amount limit, but we also have the quantity limit displayed when anyone is creating the purchase order. Okay, so now we are moving onto a different bucket supplier model. Streamline B2B document sharing with intelligence, Oracle Business Network connectivity, and self-service registration. So this feature specifically talks about B2B document sharing. So if we have suppliers that are using, for example, OBN, which is the Oracle Business Network, we would always want to take advantage of OBN because that is going to allow us to seamlessly transfer purchasing documents and get invoices from them instead of relying on the normal route, which is through emails. So you do want to take advantage of that. So now with this feature, the supplier self-service registration flow now launches with a company search dialog box that helps the user select their company from an auto-suggested list of verified companies. This is used for checking the supplier status in OBN. So imagine a situation that you do not know whether your supplier is using OBN, right? And so because you do not know, that's why you decide to go the traditional route, which is you decide not to use B2B document sharing. Instead, you decide just to have email purchase orders sent out to them, and then we have the traditional route of communication between the supplier. But let's say while registering the supplier, you already know that the supplier is using OBN. It just makes things a lot easier for the supplier manager because he now knows that, okay, this supplier is already on OBN, then we can leverage that and make the onboarding easier, and then the purchasing transactions thereafter much more easier. So this feature allows the supplier manager. So supplier manager would be someone who is overseeing the suppliers internally in the company, in the organization. So if the supplier is enabled in OBN, Oracle Procurement guides you to establish document sharing with the supplier, starting with a recommendation to enable B2B messaging. So just like it says, the system is now going to prompt you that, okay, the supplier is on OBN, why don't you use B2B messaging for that? So it's a great feature that way. And now that many suppliers are starting using OBN, we can definitely take advantage of that. Remove mandatory check on DUNS number, taxpayer ID in supplier registration. So if you look at this screen, now these are the registration options. And again, this is likely something that a front-end user may not see. Now, whenever a supplier is being registered, and this is for internal registrations, we can decide if the DUNS number is required or not, right? So for example, if you look at, these are the registration options. The specific option that we are talking about here is require supplier identifier. So this can be any of these DUNS number, taxpayer ID, etc. Now, when do we want to make this identifier mandatory, right? So for example, self-service procurement, this is a way of registering supplier. so is internal supplier request, and so is external supplier request. Now, when we are using self-service procurement, most likely the front-end user who only knows maybe the supplier's phone number and email, they may not know any of these identifiers. And what that would do is, if we do decide to make it mandatory here, it is just going to increase the supplier onboarding cycle. So we do not want to do that. And now this feature gives us the option to decide where do we want to make this mandatory, right? So do we want to make it mandatory for external supplier requests? Absolutely, because that would reduce our work. We'll make sure that the suppliers who are registering themselves, they enter those numbers. And then, so this is what the feature allows us to do. So it basically gives us control of how we want to onboard the supplier, and it kind of removes a few bottlenecks in supplier registration. Use Datafox supplier intelligence signals and internal registration and registration approvals. So now this is an internal registration. So when I say internal registration, this is a registration that is done by a supplier manager or a supplier admin in the internal team. This is not the supplier registration available in the self-service procurement page. And that is why we have the option of deciding what the business relationship is going to be. Regardless of when, let's say I have a supplier manager within my organization, he is registering new suppliers. Now he'll be able to see the Datafox intelligence score for this specific supplier. Now, I won't go into what Datafox intelligence is, but it is a means of what the Datafox intelligence does is that it uses data to really find out what is going on with that specific supplier, and then it gives a score based on the data that has been found out for that specific supplier. So this, for example, has a score of 40. And then if we look at the details of the score, we can see that, okay, this supplier has filed for bankruptcy, or which recently filed for bankruptcy, declined to provide a response to a specific question or information that was asked. And this is very important information because immediately right off the bat, I know, okay, do I even want to register this supplier? Because if I did not have this information easily available to me, likely what would have happened is that it would have taken admin work to register, then it would have gone in the approval cycle, and then maybe after a few transactions down the line, worst, after having created an agreement with the supplier, I would have realized this information. So this just helps ensure that the buying team or the supplier manager is up to date with the information, and then this information is available immediately when the supplier is being registered. So this kind of prevents us from getting into deals that we might later on regret. This same option, which is Datafox supplier intelligence score, is available in the area where we create reports, right? So this is the area where, based on these different criterias, we are going to be able to create an OTBI report, right? And so OTBI report is something that the user can easily create. These are pretty simple options available in Oracle, where you kind of drag and drop subject areas, and then you can create an Excel of sorts, and then create a report of your own. So these areas are now also available in the OTBI work area. So if you decided you wanted to have that information added, then these can now be added. And again, so if you wanted to create a report and look at the 500 suppliers we have, or the 300 suppliers that we want to register in the next fiscal cycle, then we can have this information in advance and then decide our next steps. Next one is review Datafox supplier intelligence when adding suppliers to an initiative. So just like we saw we can see the intelligence score when registering a supplier. We can also see the same when creating a new initiative. And as you can see, for this supplier, there's already score there. So there's an 80 and there's a minus 50. So this is going to prompt me to dig further down on what's wrong. Do I want to have a transaction or a relationship with this supplier? Things like that. For example, you may look for high-risk suppliers to include for a more rigorous review on risk management qualifications. So yeah, that is what it is going to do. So we might still want to do business, but then we can have a more rigorous review on these suppliers depending on the score. So this just overall makes the onboarding process more efficient. Okay, we are back to procurement contracts. Use deep links to access a contract. Now, so deep links are they are another terminology for hyperlinks, but then they can be used outside of Oracle. So if you had a Word document and if you had a deep link for a contract, you could still paste it and it would act like a hyperlink. So someone who had access would be able to see whatever information is embedded in this contract number. So use deep links to access a contract. So you can use deep links to navigate directly to a contract from an email notification. So this is an example, or the OTBI reports. You can copy and save direct links to a contract. You can share the deep link that opens a contract with someone else, or you can manually add the links to any page, such as a report or a user interface page. So specifically with contracts, there's a part that the legal team might play, and then there would be business stakeholders who might not necessarily be on the system, but this allows us to pass on all that information seamlessly with other users who are not adept at using the Oracle system but still need to be able to view the contract. Sourcing bug fix in this update, unlocking of commercial response in round completed 2-stage RFQ is not allowed. So after the technical stage is unlocked and the technical responses are evaluated, category managers have the option to create a new round if the supplier responses are not satisfactory, of course. And when a new round is created after the technical stage, commercial responses must remain logged and sealed. Therefore, after the update, you won't be allowed to unlock or unseal the responses submitted in previous round when a new round is in progress. So this is very similar to the feature that we talked about. One way or the other, we do not want the commercial responses to be available for the buyer to see unless we have got everything we wanted out of the technical stage. So this is just another step that makes sure that happens. Oops. Okay, so now I think we are in the last bucket, which is not quick wins. So now this is the very first feature and an exciting one. Procure goods and services using the responsive self-service procurement application. So as you can see, this is sort of mobile application, and there's a lot we can do here. I won't go into details, but this just makes the usability of self-service procurement very easy and kind of on the go. So we can procure goods and services using the responsive self-service procurement application on your mobile devices. So of course, Oracle can be opened on a mobile device, but you can imagine you'd have to open a desktop version of Oracle, and you can still use that on a handheld device, but it's not, the ease of use is not great. But with this, now this is meant for that specific purpose, and we want the users, we want to give the users the ease of operation. And so that is what this will do. Using the application, you can create requisitions for local, punch out catalog items, smart forms, and request non-catalog items as well. So this is pretty much everything that a user who is operating a desktop would have been able to do. You can shop for catalog contact, you can content. You can use the new smart search to find items. You can then choose to add items to the cart. After adding, you can review excuse me, you can review and update delivery and accounting information, which is great. So you can now change the charge account if you wanted to, and finally submit the requisition. Integrate and extend procurement using REST services. So in this update, Oracle Fusion Cloud Procurement delivers new and modified REST APIs to enable and simplify integration with external systems. So like I had said earlier, REST APIs is another means to an end to update purchase order and do Oracle transactions. Now, the new REST APIs that are introduced are Procurement Business Unit List of Values and Work Confirmation. The other REST APIs that have been enhanced are for purchase requisitions, we can now post and patch dual control items. Post and patch are supported for attributes related to suggested buyer. We also have purchase order schedules, and now we can use the confirm work custom action to upload lines to draft work confirmation. Complex work procurement create work confirmations for purchase orders with progress payment schedules. So in the update 21C, work completion can only be reported by requester via the My Receipts user interface without the ability to route for approval. Now in this update, as a supplier user, you can now by yourself report on work completion for your complex work purchase order. And the supplier user can specify the value of work performed in terms of currency amount, so for services, or units completed for goods, or percentage completed. Buyers and requesters can also create work confirmations on behalf of their suppliers. Moving on. Create item replacements by choosing an alternate item or alternate supply. So this screenshot kind of gives you an idea, but let's delve a little deeper on what this feature is. With this solution, you can perform mass replacement or on unfulfilled purchase orders using appropriate alternate items or supply sources. So this will help us in a situation when we want to ensure that any new replenishment request doesn't get created for the items in disruption till the supply is restored, right? And this is now become, at least it was a common scenario now during the COVID times when the supply chains were disrupted. And so this is one feature that the businesses definitely can use, because whenever supply chain doesn't go the way we want, and then we want to do item replacements, there's an easier and better way of doing at a mass level, right? So this new feature ensures that the replenishment requests are created only for the original item. So again, there's more to this than the screenshot does not do a lot of justice. But overall, what the feature has tried to do is that it is trying to make item replacement more easier, and it can be done at a mass level. So you can either choose an alternate item, or you can choose an alternate supplier for fulfilling the demands. Supplier qualification management automatically requalifies survey qualifications on expirations. Now, the ability to survey employees periodically to provide supplier feedback is important, of course, but what would happen is that once they are expired, someone would have to manually go in and change it. So now what we can do is you can now configure survey initiatives to launch automatically when the prior qualification expires, right? So we are talking about supplier qualification, but we are talking about internal surveys, and then these can be automatically enabled after expiration. So that just reduces an additional manual step and make sure that this is a continuous process over time without breaks. Spend classification, improve classification result using training exclusions. So now, as the screenshot shows, we have training exclusions now, and then these training exclusions can be based off of specific keywords. So text strings in spend data often include common words that can appear in a wide variety of unrelated spend records, making them poor predictors, because in the end we are going to be using these to predict, just like we had seen the other screenshot and we had seen a dashboard of sorts. So this overall improves the classification of result because we now have the option of excluding things that we don't want. Oops. Channel revenue management. Details. Use the legal entity time zone in channel revenue management. So you can use the legal entity time zone when creating programs, accruals, adjustment claims, and posting transactions. If the setting on the legal entity profile indicates that the legal entity time zone should be used, then all channel programs, claims, and other transactions will be displayed and processed for this time zone as well. There is an additional part to this. For deductions and settlement, these dates exist in the user interface, REST services, and processing of claims. These processes also include inbound AR integrations, claim creation, and settlement. Import additional information from a supplier invoice line descriptive flex field via a CSV file. So exactly what it says. We can now import additional information from a supplier invoice line DFF. So descriptive flex field, like I said earlier, before a couple of slides, it's a flex field and it allows us to capture additional information. So now we can import that additional information that is on the supplier invoice line using a CSV file. Supplier channel management, again, use a different catalog for alternate supplier sites in a supplier annual programs. So as the screenshot shows, this feature provides the additional capability to ensure that the eligibility will qualify annual rebates from the manufacturers based on purchase from distributors. So this is the alternate site information that is now available. And so we can have a different catalog be used for this specific purchase, this specific purpose. Extend supplier, sorry, my slides are a little finicky. Extend supplier rebate program eligibility. Programmatically extend the eligibility algorithm to qualify receiving transactions or supplier invoices. For example, an extension could be the ability to support precedents when multiple rebates apply. Thus, a supplier rebate at the ship to level takes precedence over a rebate at the account level, and we can see how this will be more beneficial when we have a supplier with lot of sites. Improves the extensibility and flexibility of eligibility to qualify supplier invoices lines for supplier rebates, thus reducing the cost of ownership. Supplier channel management. Specify exchange rate date for manual adjustment to supplier programs. So the screenshot shows us here. Let's say we have invoice. You can see that the adjustment date is 2/2/22, right? So this is in February, and this transaction or invoice was from 14th January. So we can make sure that the system picks the exchange rate for the date in question and not the date when we are adjusting. So optionally override an exchange rate date when adjustment currency is not the same as ledger currency. If an exchange rate is not provided, then adjustment approval date is used. So yeah, okay. I think that was the last one. Hadik, do you want to pick this up? Or,
yes,
yeah.
I'll be taking it over. Thank you so much, everyone, for patiently listening to all of us. And we won't take more than 1 minute now. And thank you, Sumit, for the wonderful insight. So we have another session on inventory and order management coming on 10th of May. If any one of you, or your colleagues would like to register, we'll be more than happy to take them. And just before you leave us all, we'd like to quickly, on the scale of 1 to 5, I'd like to know that how we did today so that we can improve it going forward. Please rate on a scale of 1 to 5. And with this, while you're putting the poll in, I'd like to let you know that we'll be sending an HTML mailer wherein you'll find a link, and on the single pager, you'll find the recording of this session and all the future session and past sessions, along with the PDF presentation as well, so which you can pass to your colleague and use within the team as well. So thank you so much once again for your important time for this really good session. And we'll look forward to see you all again. And we'll be closing the poll now. And thank you, everyone. And if I'll quickly check if there's any question. We don't have any question as of now. And if you do have it at a later stage, you can reach out to any of the project managers or the buyer consultant or any team leaders of supply chain. We'll be happy to help you. Or if you need any one-to-one session, we'll be happy to do that as well. So here are the sessions on your screen right now, so you can register. Again, I'm repeating, inventory and order management is coming on 10th of May. So we'll see you again. Thank you so much. Thank you all again for your time.